Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the AREEVO EVO. These are a pair of wireless buds with a carbon fiber transparent design, and that might be the most interesting thing about these. It's a relatively unfamiliar name, at least to me, perhaps a newer player in this space, and the EVOs are relatively affordable. You can find these buds on Amazon for around $35, sometimes going on sale for even less than that. That being said, they're still relatively simple as far as features are concerned. For instance, there is no ANC or active noise cancellation support, relying completely on the passive isolation from the tips to do the work if you want to drown out fan and engine sounds when commuting, as well as lacking a app support, so you don't really get any additional customization when it comes to the controls as well as EQs. But I still thought the design was cool enough that I wanted to take a closer look, again using carbon fiber on the case as well as the buds themselves. And they are also rated to be IPX4, so if you are sweating or if it's raining outside, they should still survive. Battery life gets up to 24 hours with the charging case. However, on a continuous session, you can expect around 7 hours or so of listening time, which is around average. And they're using Bluetooth 5.3 with normal audio codecs of SBC and AAC, but no support for high-res, LDAC, or aptX. Also expected, though, for a budget pair in this price range. Last but not least, they are featuring 10mm dynamic drivers and do have ENC for answering phone calls, blocking out some environmental noise. Those specs are reiterated again on the packaging here, and then on the inside we have just a parchment paper along with the buds. Further down below, you'll find a USB Type-C charging cable, 2 additional sets of silicone tips to get a more snug fit, and a quick user guide. Briefly referencing the controls, there's also a low latency gaming mode that you can turn on and off, and thankfully, yes, you're able to control volume on here as well by double clicking on the left or the right side to bring it higher or lower, as well as triple click to skip tracks, and you can also tap once to play and pause the audio. Incoming calls can also be answered or rejected, so good enough when it comes to the control scheme compared to some buds which are omitting the volume capability. Since you don't have the app support on here, at least everything that you want to control are baked on in. Two features though which are missing would be A, there is no audio transparency mode on these either that uses the microphones to amplify sounds around you so you can have a conversation or become aware as you're walking down a street. The other feature that is missing would be any type of built-in EQ controls, which is kind of expected, I guess, but just something to keep in mind. Now, taking a closer look at the design of the case, I do think this is the strongest aspect of the EVO buds, just because they do look really cool in kind of a nothing-inspired way, but you have this carbon fiber finish wrapping around many components, which is then in this acrylic crystal case. So I do really like the design, and then here on the back, you can also make out the connectors here for the USB Type-C charging, as well as the hinge there for opening up the battery case. Even the magnet here for keeping the case closed, as well as an LED light there for charging, is going to be visible because of the transparent design, so looking quite distinctive. The hinge is held into place pretty securely along with magnets for the buds. They can also be easily removed and popped back in for charging. Again, the carbon fiber texture continues with the buds themselves on the surface, which is touch sensitive, which is an oversized area compared to most other buds that I've seen recently. It's actually quite large and very easy to hit. Plus, one feature that I do like is that they've built in an audio chime, giving you confirmation when the touchpad here is being clicked. So this is one example, just putting it very close here to the mic. I actually do like that subtle detail, making it, again, easier to realize if you properly clicked on the touchpad or not, but because of the large surface area and the slightly grippy texture of the carbon fiber, it's actually quite hard to miss. So the sensitivity of the touch controls might be one of the better attributes here. Also, the case, by the way, can lie completely flat, although it doesn't support Qi wireless charging, but it is what it is. Otherwise, though, if we turn the buds around, you can tell that the shape is rather unconventional. They're still using silicone tips and crafted out of plastic, but it seems like they just purposefully enlarged, again, that surface area to make it bigger to click on. And so, being honest, I had to fiddle around with some of the silicone tips to get a more comfortable fit initially, but after I found a correct position, I still found them to be good enough from a wearing point of view. It just takes a little bit of acclimation, though, compared to other buds, which may have a slightly more streamlined shape. Overall, though, they still stayed in place, and for a couple of hours of music listening didn't feel too uncomfortable or heavy either. Moving into the audio quality and performance next, this is also kind of interesting because I did find them to be very loud when it comes to volume output. I know that sounds a little bit strange to bring up, but these were louder than pretty much every other pair of buds I've ever compared it against. In fact, at higher than 80%, it was almost uncomfortable for me, unless you were in a really loud space and you were trying to crank it all the way up just to hear the audio, that is. And although having powerful volume output is a good thing, what I would like to see improved in a next-gen revision would perhaps be a little bit more of a smooth transition between some of those volume levels. For instance, between levels 2 and 3, there is a pretty large jump. Although it isn't as extreme as going from 0 to 100 all of a sudden, it is really quite noticeable. Getting something in between those levels is a little bit more difficult unless you are downloading a third-party app and further changing some of the properties like EQ from there. But right out of the box, I would say even levels 1 and 2 should already be plenty loud for most folks. As for the sound quality, I would say it's solid enough for a budget pair of buds. That is, when you're listening to pop music, they sound generally energetic with a nice touch of bass. It's actually not super strong though, so if you are a bass head, they're not going to be overpowering. In fact, I would say the mids as well as trebles are actually emphasized a little bit more on these, interestingly enough. But if you are listening to a drum beat in a pop song or EDM track, you can definitely still notice it. That being said, really discerning audiophiles probably would long for a little bit more detail and nuances in some of the trebles compared to more pro wireless buds that we have seen in the past. So definitely won't get the most nuanced sound in the world, but as a $30 pair of buds, if you're wearing them for exercise, just casually commuting, I think you'll still be mostly satisfied here. Just note that despite a more aggressive, kind of rugged design, it's not necessarily earth-shattering in terms of bass, possibly because they are using still single drivers inside compared to a stacked multi-driver solution, but again, expected in this price range. That said, acoustic recordings as well as instrumentals, podcasts all sounded pretty good. Again, using some of those mids and trebles, I found them to be still quite satisfactory. Last but not least, when it came to the microphone call quality, it's also quite average. The microphone is a little bit further away from your mouth, and so if you're in indoor spaces, more quiet areas, it's still fine, but if it gets overly loud, it can still be a little bit more difficult. But works if you have to use it in a pinch, though I would say music might be slightly more the priority and emphasis of this model. So that is more or less it as far as our quick hands-on review of the AREEVO EVO True Wireless Buds. The carbon fiber and transparent shell design of the casing here are probably the best attributes. I am a fan of the overall look, plus again the transparent light there that kind of pops on in a darker environment just make them look extremely cool, plus the touch controls which are oversized, really easy to hit with some of those confirmation chimes I also think is a nice idea. That being said, you have to be okay with a pair which is actually quite limited when it comes to feature set, again no ANC support, and interesting audio performance which is at the very least very loud. However, again, if they could make a slightly smoother transition point between some of those lower levels, I actually think it could be even more polished feeling. And although the sound itself isn't necessarily going to be blowing socks off of audiophiles, again since it is missing fancier codecs like LDAC or aptX connectivity for general music consumption, again listening to pop music, they were still doing a fair enough job. Connecting to mobile devices at the very least felt pretty stable, plus with that low latency mode, you could definitely consume some videos or do some gaming without noticing as much lag or delay. So not too problematic, very casual and simple, kind of everyday style buds. So in a perfect world, I actually wouldn't mind seeing a slightly more premium version of this, adding in active noise cancellation, supporting more audio codecs, and possibly a slightly higher end driver as well, as something like EVO Pros I think could be very compelling, because right now, again, they are just very simple, but again, if you do like the way they look, primarily for casual music listening, then it's worth keeping this on the radar and seeing what their future releases will bring. Definitely an interesting introduction to this brand that has been the AREEVO EVO